Hi, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of joybaking.com. Today we're going to make egg bread, and this is what it looks like. Isn't this a beautiful bread? As you can see, we shaped it into a 3-strand braid. I did sprinkle the top with some sesame seeds, entirely optional. It has, as you can see, a lovely golden brown crust. Inside it is soft and tender. Really great tasting bread. So when you make egg bread, you have to start the night before, because what we're going to do now is make what is called a pre-ferment, which really is just a technical name for a little bit of bread dough. And we're just going to make this by hand. So you'll need a medium-sized bowl, and I have in here 1 cup minus 2 tablespoons, which is 115 grams of bread flour. To that, I'm adding a half a teaspoon, 1 gram of SAF red instant yeast. I like to use the instant yeast for a couple reasons. One, I don't have to proof it. I can just put it right in and mix it into my other dry ingredients. And it really gives a nice rise. But if you want to use the active dry yeast, you could use just the same amount, but you will have to dissolve it into your water and have your water warm, and then you can proof it that way. And then salt, a half a teaspoon, 2 grams of salt. You can use kosher salt, which I like to use, or just regular table salt. And just whisk that, or you can just use a spoon, your hand, mix that, and then make a well in the center. And then I'm going to add just a scant third of a cup, 75 grams. I'm using cold filtered water, just cold from the fridge. And then, you can just use a spoon, your hand. We're just going to moisten all that flour. That's the important thing. I'll show you another way to do it. If I have a spatula or one of these plastic scrapers, you can just pick it up with your hand and mix it all together. Just want to make sure all of the flour is moistened. You don't want any pockets. And then what I like to do is just kind of cut through pile it up. You can do it like that, or you can just take your fingers. I'll just do it old-fashioned way. Now you would say, why are we doing this? If you do this, and then what we're going to do is let it sit at room temperature for about an hour, and then I'm just going to put it into the refrigerator overnight. And this kind of thing, if you make a small amount of dough and you refrigerate it overnight, it will add flavor to your final bread dough. So that's the only reason why we're doing this. So now I have my dough. I'm going to take a bowl, put a little bit of oil. Yes, that is my dog growling at my feet. Sorry. Hazard of having a dog. And I'm just taking a paper towel, make sure it's greased so that it doesn't stick. Put it in there, just flip it over, so a little bit of oil on there, and cover it. And that's it. I'm gonna, like I said, just gonna let it sit on the counter to proof for 1 hour, and then just put it into the refrigerator. And it can sit there 12 to 16 hours. So I make it the night before, and then I start my bread in the morning. So we'll see you back here tomorrow. So we are back. I did let my pre-ferment chill overnight in the refrigerator. So now we're ready to make our bread dough. So in a separate bowl, I have 3 cups, 390 grams of bread flour. To that, I'm going to add 1 1/4 teaspoons, 4 grams. Now I'm using the instant yeast again. You could use the SAF, either the red, or you could even use the gold here. Or if you don't have that, you could use the active dry, the same amount. But again, you're going to have to warm your water and activate it in the water. So That's a great thing about the instant yeast. And then I'm going to add 2 tablespoons, 15 grams of dried milk powder. And what that does is, 1, it helps to color the crust, give it that beautiful golden brown. 2, it adds flavor. And 3, it keeps the bread moist. And then I'm going to add 2 teaspoons, 8 grams of salt. Just as a side note, if you have a scale, please use it for this, really for all your baking. You're much more accurate if you weigh your ingredients. But if you don't have a scale, I give you the cup measurements. So just whisk all that together. And then we are going to need 1/4 cup, 65 grams of eggs. You want your eggs to be cold, and I know it's kind of 1/4 cup. It's a little more than 1 large egg. So what you're going to do is, I have in here 2 large eggs. I'm going to start, and then I'm just going to take my whisk and break them up. Easier to measure them when, like so. And then, like I said, if you have a scale, 65 grams, or else you can just measure out in your measuring cup. And see if I can get this right. Okay, now don't throw out the rest, because we'll use that for our egg wash at the end. So just cover it and put it aside. So you want your eggs to be cold, and then you will also need 5/8 cup, which is 150 grams of cold from the fridge water. I like to use filtered water. So you want the water cold, you want your eggs cold, and you want your pre-ferment cold. And the reason is we're going to be kneading this dough for, I think it's around 10 minutes. That's going to warm it up. And so what I want the finished dough to be is at room temperature. So that's why, there's a lot of friction when you knead, so it warms up the dough. So that's why you start with cold things. And then, so I have the water in there. I'll put the eggs. This is an enriched bread, so it does have butter and eggs. It's kind of like a brioche, but not as much butter and eggs, so it's a lot less rich than a brioche. So then we have our pre-ferment here. It's kind of softened. There's some air bubbles in there. And what I'm going to do, I don't want to just put a big blob in there, so I'm just going to cut through. You can use a knife. I'm just using a bench scraper. Just cut it into pieces and plop it in there. And like I said, the good thing about doing a pre-ferment is it sits for like proofs overnight in the refrigerator, and that's going to add, so it gets flavor to it, and that's going to add flavor to our egg bread. You can do that for a lot of different breads. So just put that in there, and then I'm going to put my flour on top. Now, I'm using a stand mixer with my dough hook. You can knead by hand, a lot harder to do, but it's very therapeutic. So if you don't have a stand mixer like this, just make it by hand. So now what we're going to do, we're going to mix this, or knead, I should say, this, for 5 minutes on first speed, and that's going to get everything all really mixed together. And then I'm going to increase my mixer speed to second speed, and I'm going to knead it an additional 2 minutes, and that's going to strengthen our dough. So you will need a timer. Set your timer. 5 minutes at first speed, 2 minutes at second. Okay, so that's what, 7 minutes? So this is our dough at this point. See, it's really thick. So now what we are going to do, we're going to add 1/3 cup, 65 grams of granulated white sugar. But we're not going to do it all at once. We're going to do it over a 5-minute period. We're going to have our mixer on second speed. So we're going to add a little. I'll just put a little on top. And then I'm going to knead that in. And once I can't see the sugar anymore, I'll add a little more and a little more. So do it gradually over 5 minutes. So set your timer and have your mixer speed on second. Okay, so that has been 5 minutes. And I'll just show you the dough because it's changed quite a bit. Remember how strong it was when we first just added those ingredients? But the sugar kind of breaks down the dough and it becomes a lot softer. As you can see, I can pull it. It's a little sticky. So that's what the sugar does. And the thing is, sugar's not only for the sweetness, it also provides moisture, keeps the bread, preserves it a little longer, and it also helps to color the crust that lovely golden brown. So now we are going to add some butter. Like I said, it's not, with the brioche you add tons of butter. We are only adding 3.5 tablespoons, which is 48 grams. So just a little, adds a little richness. You can, and the color, but not like brioche. So the butter is cold. I'm using unsalted, and what I want to do is just soften it a little. So I just got a piece. You use plastic wrap, wax paper. I'm just going to fold that over, and you could use a rolling pin. I've got this meat tenderizer. I like this. It's a good thing, not just to pound meat. It can do butter. So I'm just going to soften it a bit to make it a little pliable. And then to check, you can kind of should bend. I'm just going to pound that. Sorry, I got to pound it just a little more. Now, some people are going to say, why don't you just leave the butter on your counter and have it softer? I don't know the chemistry, but when you use cold and you pound it, it doesn't change. If you let it sit, it kind of changes the chemistry of the butter. I'm not sure on that, but that's the way it works. So now what I'm going to do is just kind of divide it up. And what we're going to do now is, again, on second speed, we're going to knead this dough somewhere between 2 and 4 minutes. We want the butter to be incorporated into the dough, and then it'll clean the dough. We'll clean the sides of the bowl, and it'll be nice and smooth and elastic and just a little sticky. But I will show you that at the end. So depending, can take between your mixer and all that, 2 to 4 minutes. Okay, let's check our dough. I did let this knead for 4 minutes with the butter. I found it needed that. It needed that. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is check the dough. So I'm just going to do the window pane test, it's called. It is, it is a strong, still, this is called, we mix this intensive mix, so it's a fairly strong dough. It's smooth, if you can see that. It's elastic, and it's just a little sticky. You can, if you find when you can wet your hands just a little, but what you want to do is take a small piece of dough and then just stretch it gently. Just go around and stretch it. Now, if your dough tears really easy as you stretch it, that means you need to, you have to knead it like a minute or two longer. I always do that. But this As you can see, it's not tearing, so that's what you're looking for. Beautiful dough, just beautiful. You can see, you can really stretch it, you can almost see through it. I'm just going to check the temperature. I have my infrared. I love this thing, thermometer. And we're at about 74, 75 degrees, which is Fahrenheit, about 24 C, so that's what you're looking for. And see, that's why we started with those cold ingredients, because, you know, we must have kneaded our dough for a little more than, must have been more than 10 minutes. So now, what I'm going to do, large bowl, I'm just putting a little bit of just a flavorless oil, you know, like vegetable, corn, canola, a light olive oil, and then I just paper towel, and we do that. You could just spray it with one of those nonstick sprays. That way our dough won't stick. And then just put your dough in and then flip it over. So there's a little oil on the top of the dough, and even though we're going to cover it, that will keep it from drying out if you put the little bit of oil. And then I'm just going to cover it with plastic wrap. Now we need to let this ferment for 1 hour at room temperature. Room temperature is defined as 73 to 76 Fahrenheit, which is 23 to 25 C. So let's cover it and let it proof for an hour, and we'll be back then. So it has been an hour. So our next step is to divide our dough. This amount of bread dough will give us 2 loaves of egg bread, and each loaf of egg bread is a 3-strand braid, so therefore we're going to have to divide this dough into 6 pieces. So I'm just going to put just a little flour down. We didn't get a lot of rise, it softened, did a bit. So just upside down. And then I'm just going to flour that a bit. Getting the air bubbles. Oh, it's a nice, beautiful dough to work with. So you will need to divide this into, like I said, 6 equal portions. A scale is really handy for this. Another reason why you should have a scale. 150 per portion. And always cut down. You could have a straight edge like I have here. You could just use a knife. Don't like kind of pull your dough, or try not to. And then just do the rest. So now, once you have all your portions, we're going to do what is called like a pre-shape. What I have here is a baking sheet lined with parchment, and then I just put a little flour down so that our dough doesn't stick to the paper. And then take your portion of dough, just kind of flatten it. You don't want any flour on your surface here. If you have to, it's not a real sticky dough, but just maybe if you have to, just flour your hands. But just flatten it, get all the air bubbles out. In about that shape. I mean, it's not critical. And then what you want to do is take the top, go down about 1/3, and then with your fingertips, just press it to seal. And then another 1/3, press it to seal down at the end, and then press it to seal like that. And then where you've sealed it, put that on the bottom, and then just roll it. It's going to get some surface tension, just a light roll like that. It's not critical, the size, just a rough shape like that. Put it on your baking sheet. I'm going to cover this. Every time you work your bread dough, you want to work it and then you want to let it rest, relax that gluten in the flour. So what I'm going to do is just cover it with the plastic wrap and let it sit for about 30 minutes. And then when we come back, we will braid our bread. So it's been ½ hour. So we are ready to form our egg bread. Now I've already done, because remember we're making 2 loaves, I've already done one. So this is what it's going to look like when you finish. I know it looks harder than it is. It really isn't. So take your bread dough and do not flour your counter. You want there to be a little friction. Otherwise it's going to be, if your dough is floured, it's going to be really hard to roll out. So you take it like that and the top becomes the bottom so that the seam's on top. And then what we're going to do is I'm just going to squash it down and flatten it like that and start rolling. We're going to roll it into about a I mean, you can kind of do it whatever size you want. I'm going to roll it to about a 14-inch, 35 centimeter. You can get a ruler. So anyways, start at the center and roll. So you can see why you don't want your counter to be floured, because your dough would just slide. This way you're getting some friction, and it's sticking just a little to the counter. And then and I like to pick it up every once in a while because you stretch it and let it go back. I like to kind of taper the ends just a bit. I mean, don't like obsess over this, whether it's perfectly the same size. You kind of want it, make it a little rustic looking. So that's about right. The important thing is to have all 3 strands the same length. And you can always re-roll a bit after. So again, press. I'm just going to do the same thing to the other 2. Okay. Make sure when you're rolling, if there's any air bubbles, just pop them. So that's about right. So now I'm just going to line them up. So now, once you have them about the same length, take your ends and bring them into the center and just kind of pinch them. So we don't want our bread undoing. And then just braid. If you're a girl and you did that as a kid, you know it's over and this way. There's all kinds of braids. I think there's 2, there's the 3, I think there's 4, there's 6, if you want to get complicated, which I've never done. I always, because that's what I wanted as a kid, the pigtails. I only know the 3. And then at the bottom, again, pinch, kind of tuck that under, pick it up, and put it like so. That's not so hard. Give them some space because they're going to rise a bit. Plus in the oven you get what's called an oven spring. You will get even more rise in the oven. So there we go. I think that looks pretty. So now I don't want my plastic wrap to stick to my dough because now we are going to proof it again. So what I do is I just take one of these non-stick sprays and just kind of lightly spray my plastic wrap. You could lightly oil it and then just flip it over. And don't do it like really tight and seal it in, because we want to just kind of lay it on top so that as it proofs and grows, you know, it can do that. Otherwise, if you seal it, it won't be able to. So now, again, room temperature, proof it for, you know, because it's an enriched dough, it takes longer than, say, a regular bread dough. I'm saying an hour and a half to probably 2, I find 2 hours. What you want is when you press into the dough, you will have an indentation that will it'll stay there and then come up. So I'm going to say an hour and a half to 2 hours. And then when we come back, we will bake them off. So I let the bread proof for almost 2 hours, and this is what it looks like. If you take your finger and you gently press the bread, it will leave like a little indentation, and you probably can't see that, just a little indentation that will come up in a, with a few minutes. So now we are ready to bake our bread. So you want to preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 180 degrees Celsius. And then I like to brush the bread with an egg wash, and that's going to give it that lovely shine to your bread. So if you remember that we had a little egg left over when we made our bread dough, you didn't throw that out, I hope. So I have that there. I'm going to add to that another large egg yolk, it's about 17 grams, and 1 tablespoon, I'm using cream, you could use milk, and just whisk that. Okay, and then with a pastry brush, I'm going to lightly brush the tops, and then I also like to brush the sides of our bread. Okay, just about done. Okay, now you could just leave it like that, or my favorite is to sprinkle some white sesame seeds on top. Gives a nice nutty flavor to our egg bread. You could use poppy seeds as well. Okay, that looks good. We are ready to bake our egg bread. Now, everyone's oven is a little different. I find in my oven about 25 minutes. So I'm going to say 25 to 30 minutes. I do like to rotate my baking sheet front to back to get even baking about halfway through. And what you're looking for, they will rise. It's called, like, you get a bit of an oven spring, so they will rise, get larger. And they will turn a beautiful, just golden brown color. And then if you tap it, it'll sound hollow. If you're new to bread baking, you can, especially if you're the first time baking. What you can do is, once they're baked, you can take a probe thermometer and just stick it into the center. It should read about 205 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 96 Celsius. It's a good way if you're new to bread making to just double check. So I'm going to say 25 to 30 minutes. Okay, so our egg bread is done. Isn't that gorgeous? As you can see, beautiful golden brown color. If you tap it, sounds hollow. Like I said, you can put a probe in there. It should be around 205 Fahrenheit, 96 Celsius. So now, put your baking pan, I put it on a wire rack. We're going to let these cool down, and then when we come back, we'll try a slice. So I did let the bread cool, still like a little warm. So put it on your cutting board, and I'm using a serrated knife. Oh, you can see that? Isn't that gorgeous? I like the color. You have that beautiful golden brown crust and then the soft white inside. Beautiful. Besides the flavor, which we're going to try, the one thing I love about bread making is that your whole house smells like a bakery. Oh. It is a very flavorful bread. It's because one, it's enriched, so you have, the butter and the eggs, which give it flavor, but also that making that pre-ferment That, you know, and letting it sit overnight in the refrigerator adds even more flavor to your bread. So if you've never done that before, you know, it's not hard, as you saw, and try it. It really makes a great tasting bread. And I like the sesame seeds on top, a little bit of nutty flavor. This is excellent, like freshly made. Some butter on it. But, you know, the next day, it's still good, just sliced, but it really makes excellent toast, or French toast, or cinnamon toast even. And, you know, it'll last 2-3 days. And then once it starts to stale, you could use it for bread pudding. So, you know, a great all-around bread that you can use for a lot of different things. But you must try this. And until next time, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of joybaking.com.